The pen was silver, no thicker than my smallest finger, and it had no business being clipped to the inner lip of the flower vase on the windowsill of Princess Elara's hospital suite. I noticed it at 6:04 on a gray morning, and I did not touch it. That is the first thing anyone should understand about how the whole affair began. I saw it, and I left it exactly where it was, and I have never in my life been so glad of a habit of stillness. My name is Corwin Ashby. For 11 years I had stood post inside the walls of the Royal House of Harrogate, and for the last 2 of them I had been one of the 4 guards trusted to hold the corridor outside, whichever room held a member of the family who was sick, or hidden, or afraid. It is not a glamorous post. There are no crowds to see you there, no cameras beyond the ones the household controls, no tourists filming from behind the gilded railings. There is only a hush, and the long patience of a man who has learned that the most important things happen slowly and then all at once. Princess Elara had been in the private wing of St. Meredith's for 9 days by then. The word given to the public was exhaustion, which was true enough to print and false enough to protect her. What was truly wrong with her was a matter for her physicians and for the king, and it was not my business except in the single, absolute way that all her safety was my business. I was to hold the door. I was to let no one pass who had not been cleared by the household roster. I was to watch, and to say nothing, and to be the last thing between a resting woman and a world that would have paid a great deal to know what her heartbeat did at night. That is why the pen mattered. A pen does not rest, and it does not sleep, and it does not forget. A pen with a pinhole lens and a battery inside it hears everything, and it never gets tired of listening. I had come on at 5, relieving Halloran, who was a good man and a heavy sleeper, and who had told me, yawning, that the night had been quiet as a chapel. I had done my walk of the suite before the princess woke. This too was habit, and I recommend it to any man who guards anything worth guarding. You learn a room the way a farmer learns a field. You learn where the light falls, where the shadows pool, what belongs and what has crept in. That morning, standing by the window with the gray coming up over the courtyard, I saw the flowers the queen consort had sent, and I saw, against the glass and the water and the pale stems, a small hard gleam that flowers do not make. I bent close, the way you bend to smell a bloom, and I understood what I was looking at, and something very cold and very old settled into place behind my ribs. I did not pull it out, I did not exclaim. I walked to the door, opened it a hand's width, and said to Denby in the corridor, in the flat voice we use for things that must not be overheard, that he was to fetch the head of the household security, Marston, and no one else, and that he was to do it without hurry so that no one watching would know that anything at all had changed. Then I closed the door and I stood between the princess's bed and that silver pen, and I waited, and I thought about who sends flowers. She woke while I waited. Princess Elara had a way of surfacing from sleep that made no sound at all, so that a man could turn and find her eyes open and watching him and never have heard her stir. She was pale that morning, paler than a woman ought to be, but her eyes were clear. "You've the look of a man who found a snake in the woodpile, Ashby," she said. "There's nothing for you to fear, ma'am," I said, which was the truth as far as it went, and the whole truth was that I did not yet know how far it went. "That," she said, settling back, "is precisely what men say when there is a great deal to fear, but I'll trust you, I always have." She closed her eyes again. "Wake me when the world has finished ending." Marston came within the quarter hour. He was a broad, careful man of 50, iron-gray at the temples, a man I had served under and respected, a man who, whatever else the day would say about him, had taught me half of what I knew about holding a line. He came into the suite quietly, and I showed him the pen without a word, and I watched his face go through the same cold understanding mine had. "How long?" he said very low. "I don't know, since the flowers came at the latest. That was the 4th day." "5 days. He said it the way you'd say a wound was 5 days old and untended. 5 days of everything, the doctors, the king's visits, her." He stopped. He was thinking of the same things I was. The private conversations, the medical words, the fear a family shows only when it believes itself unheard. All of it, perhaps, sitting in the memory of a silver pen, waiting to be carried out of the building and sold, or worse, given away for reasons that had nothing to do with money. "We take it now," Marston said. "We take it, we find who placed it, and we photograph it first," I said. "Where it sits, the angle, what it can see, then we take it. And Marston, the flowers came from the Queen Consort's household." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw him weigh the thing I had just set on the scale, and I saw him decide, as careful men do, to set it aside until it could be proven. "Flowers pass through a dozen hands," he said. "A florist, a footman, a porter at the door. Don't hang a name on a thing before the thing is understood, Ashby. That's how good men are ruined." It was the wisest thing said that day, and within 6 hours it would be used to ruin him. We did it properly. Marston photographed the pen from 4 angles on his own device, noted the time, and lifted it into a cloth. The moment it left the vase, I felt the room change, as though a held breath had been let go, and I understood how long that small silver thing had been sitting there drinking us in. Marston turned it in the cloth and found on its side a maker's mark and a serial, tiny as a flea. He wrote the serial down. Then he did the thing that a head of security must do, the thing that his whole office demanded of him. He took it to the king. I know what happened in that room only in pieces, from Marston himself, and from a footman named Ives who was clearing the breakfast things, and who had the good sense to keep his eyes down and his ears open. But the shape of it is not in dispute, because the shape of it was arranged. The Queen Consort was present. Her name was Morwenna, and she had been the king's wife for 6 years, and there were those in the house who loved her, and those who watched her the way you watch weather that is coming your way and does not look kind. She was in the king's private study when Marston arrived with the pen, and that, a careful man would note, was not an accident of timing. Marston laid the pen on the king's desk and told him plainly what it was, where it had been found, and how long it had likely been listening. King Alaric was not a young man, and grief had made him older than his years. He had lost his first wife, the Queen Isolde, and mourned her still, and now his daughter lay in a hospital bed and a stranger's eye had been placed in her room. He looked at the pen, and Ives said his hand shook just once and then went still. And into that silence, before the king could speak, the Queen Consort spoke. "A recording device," she said, "in the private suite of the princess, found by your own men, Marston, in a room your office was charged, above all else, with keeping sealed. She let it sit. Who has had the run of that corridor these 9 days? Whose roster governs who comes and goes? Whose keys open that suite?" "Mine, your majesty," Marston said, because it was true and because he was not a man who dodged. "Then whatever I was placed there," she said, gently, terribly, "was placed there under your keeping. Either your men are careless or your men are bought. I cannot say which is the greater failure." She turned to the king. "Alaric, our daughter has been spied upon in her sickbed, and the man whose single duty was to prevent it stands here holding the proof of his own failure as though it were a trophy. It was masterful. I have turned it over many times since, and I have never found the seam in it. Every word she said was, on its face, correct. Marston's office did govern that corridor. The pen had gotten past his men. A failure of security had occurred on his watch. She did not accuse him of placing it. She did not need to. She simply arranged the true facts into a shape that pointed at him, and then she stood back and let the king's fear and grief do the rest." The king was silent for a long time. Then he said, in a voice Ives described as very quiet and very tired, "Marston, you have served this house for 22 years. "I have, sire." "And in 22 years you have never once given me cause to doubt you." The king looked at the pen. "But my daughter's most private hours have been carried out of this house in the belly of that thing, and I cannot know how many, and I cannot unknow that it happened while your men held the door. I cannot have a head of security whose corridor can be breached. I cannot." He looked up. "You are relieved of your post. Effective now. Clear your office by noon." Marston did not argue. That is the part I have never forgotten, though I did not see it. He did not argue. He stood, a man of 50 who had given his working life to the men in that house, and he said, "Yes, sire." And he asked only one thing. He asked that the roster of the corridor be preserved exactly as it stood, every entry, every name, every hour, so that whoever came after him could learn from it. Then he left the room, and by the time the news reached me at my post, I had already begun to understand that the wrong man was walking out of the palace, and that the right one was somewhere inside it, watching him go and smiling. I want to be careful here, because this is where a story like this can go wrong. It would be easy to tell you that I knew, in that first hour, exactly who had done it and exactly why, and that the rest was only a matter of proving what I already believed. That is not the truth, and the truth is better. What I knew in that first hour was only this, that Marston had not done it. A man does not photograph, catalog, and personally carry to the king the proof of his own crime. He does not ask that the roster be preserved. Guilty men bury evidence. They do not walk it into the sovereign's study and lay it on the desk. Marston's every action from the moment I showed him that pen had been the action of an innocent man doing his duty, and it had been used against him. Each honest step reframed as a step toward the scaffold. So I knew he was innocent, and if he was innocent, then someone else had placed that pen. And if someone else had placed it, then the same someone had, with astonishing speed and astonishing calm, been ready and waiting in the king's study to turn its discovery into a blade and drive it into Marston's back. That readiness was the thing that would not let me sleep. You do not arrange to be standing in exactly the right room at exactly the right moment to condemn a man unless you knew, before the pen was ever found, that a pen would be found. Which meant the trap had two jaws. The pen was one. Marston was the other. And the hand that had set them both was still inside these walls, and it had just watched its plan succeed, and it believed, it had every reason to believe, that no one would ever look past the ruined man to the ruin behind him. I was at that time a corridor guard of no particular rank. I had no authority to investigate anything. I had no office, no roster of my own, no right to question the household staff or to open a locked door. What I had was a post, a pair of eyes, and 11 years of watching people who thought that a man in a red tunic and a bearskin was a piece of the furniture. People forget that furniture has ears. People say a great many things in front of a guard that they would never say in front of a man they think of as a man. And I had one thing more, which I did not yet know was the most important thing of all. I had the pen's serial number, because Marston, in the last hour of his career, had written it down, and knowing what was coming, or fearing it, had pressed the slip of paper into my hand as he passed my post on his way to clear his office. "You saw it first," he said to me low, not stopping. "You saw what it was and you left it be. That was right, Ashby. Whatever they say about my office, that was right." He put the paper in my hand. "I'll not ask you to fall on a sword for me, but I'll ask you to remember that I carried it to him. I carried it to him. A man who hid a thing does not carry it to the king." And then he was gone, down the long corridor and out of the house, and I stood at my post with a serial number in my glove and the whole gray morning ahead of me, and I made a decision that a wiser man might not have made. I decided to find out who really placed the pen, not to clear Marston, though I wanted that. Not for justice in the large way, though I wanted that too. I decided it for the woman sleeping behind the door at my back, because whoever had put an eye in her sick room had done it for a reason, and a reason like that does not spend itself on a single pen. Whoever had done this wanted something, and people who want something inside a royal house do not stop at one silver pen. They are only just beginning. I looked at the serial number. I looked at the closed door of the suite, and beyond it, in my mind, at the long corridors and the locked archives and the careful, smiling faces of a house that had just congratulated itself on solving a crime it had in fact only begun to commit. And I thought, very well. You have fired the man who guarded the door. Now you will have to reckon with the man who is still standing at it. That was the first day. I did not sleep that night, and not for the last time. The second day I began the way a man begins any careful thing, by learning what he already had. I laid it out in my mind as I stood my post, the whole shape of it, every piece I could touch. A silver pen with a lens and a serial. A vase of flowers sent, according to the household card, by the Queen Consort's own office. A 5-day window between the flowers arriving and the pen being found. A head of security relieved within hours by a king too grieved to see the seam in his wife's reasoning. And one small, stubborn fact that everyone in that study had stepped over. Someone had known the pen would be found. That last fact was a door, and I meant to open it. Because think on it. A recording pen hidden in a vase might sit for weeks. It might be carried out with the wilting flowers and never discovered at all. That is rather the point of hiding it. So how did the Queen Consort come to be standing in the king's study, poised and ready with a speech that turned its discovery into Marston's ruin, at the precise hour it was found? She could not have planned to be there for a thing she did not know would happen, unless she had arranged for it to happen. Unless, and this was the cold thought that came to me somewhere in the small hours, the pen had never been meant to record anything of value at all, unless the pen had been meant from the first to be found. I turned that over until it took a shape I could hold. If the true purpose of the pen was not to spy but to be discovered, then everything changed. Then the pen was not the crime. The pen was the bait, and the target of the bait was not the princess. It was Marston. Someone wanted the head of security gone, and they had reasoned, coldly and well, that a king grieving over his sick daughter would not weigh evidence carefully if you put a spy in her sick room, that he would want a head to strike off, and would strike the nearest one, and that the nearest one whose office could be blamed was Marston's. So they placed the pen where it would be found, in flowers that could be traced to a household, but perhaps not their own, and they stood ready to turn its discovery into a dismissal, and it had worked. It had worked in a single morning. But if I was right, then the whole thing had a flaw, and the flaw was the flowers. Because whoever placed the pen had needed a way to get it into the suite, and flowers were the way, and flowers came with a card, and a card came from an office, and an office kept records. Trace the flowers to the last honest hand that touched them, and you would find the first dishonest one. The card said the Queen Consort's office, and this is where I had to be a wiser man than my anger wanted me to be, because the easy story, the story the whole house would happily believe, was that the Queen Consort had spied on her stepdaughter and framed the head of security, and that was that. But Marston's own words came back to me. Don't hang a name on a thing before the thing is understood. A card that reads the Queen Consort's office is exactly what a clever enemy of the Queen Consort would arrange if the aim were to ruin her too in time, or exactly what a careless friend of hers would leave if she truly were behind it, or the plain truth. The card told me where to look. It did not tell me what I would find. So I looked. I could not question the household staff. I had no standing, but I did not need to question them. I needed only to be present and patient, and to remember that a guard is furniture. I began to volunteer for the duties that put me where the flowers had been. The flowers for the royal sick rooms came, I learned by simply watching, through a service door on the east side, received by a footman, logged in a book kept by the understeward, and carried up by whichever household servant was free. The book was the thing. It would show who received the vase, and when, and if the house kept the kind of records I hoped it did, who carried it up. On the third day I contrived a reason to pass the understeward's pantry twice, and the second time the door stood open, and the book lay on the shelf, and I let my eyes rest on it for the length of time it takes to adjust a glove. The flowers had been received on the fourth day, as I knew. The book named the footman who took them in, a young man called Petch. And in the column for who carried them up, it named a name I did not expect, and the not expecting of it was the first true crack in the whole smooth surface of the thing. It named a woman called Ida Krell. I knew the name. Everyone below stairs knew the name. Ida Krell was a lady's maid, but not a maid of the princesses, and not of the general household. Ida Krell was the personal maid of the Lady Verena, and the Lady Verena was the queen consort's daughter. Now a lady's maid does not, in the ordinary way of things, carry flowers up to a hospital suite. That is servant's work, footman's work, and Ida Krell was above it. For her to have carried that particular vase, on that particular day, to that particular room, she must have asked to. And a lady's maid does not ask to carry flowers, unless someone has asked her to ask. I want to say plainly that I did not, at that moment, conclude that the Lady Verena had planted the pen. That would have been the same mistake the king had made, arranging true facts into a shape, and mistaking the shape for the truth. What I concluded was smaller and more solid, that the vase which held the pen had been carried up not by an ordinary servant, but by the personal maid of the queen consort's daughter, and that this was a thread, and that I would follow it and see where it led before I let myself believe anything at all. But following it required me to leave my post, and I could not leave my post. A corridor guard who wanders is a corridor guard who is noticed, and I could not afford to be noticed, not by the smiling hand that had ruined Marston and would ruin me twice as fast if it saw me looking. So I did the only thing I could. I found an ally. His name was Denby, the guard who had stood in the corridor the morning I found the pen, and he was young, and he had liked Marston, and he was angry in the hot, useless way the young are angry when they see a good man wronged. I turned that heat to use. I did not tell him everything. A secret shared with a hot-headed man is a secret with a short life, but I told him enough. I told him that Marston had not done it, and that the proof of who had was somewhere in this house, and that I needed a pair of legs that could go where mine could not without the whole household marking it. "Tell me what to do," he said, and his jaw was set, and I thought, "Careful now. Careful with this one, or he'll get us both hanged out of loyalty." "You'll do nothing rash," I said. "You'll do nothing at all that a bored, gossiping young guardsman wouldn't do. You'll go below stairs, where you're welcome, and you'll be curious about the wrong things loudly so that no one marks you being curious about the right ones. And you'll find out one thing for me. You'll find out why Ida Krell carried a vase of flowers up to the princess's suite 4 days ago, when carrying flowers is beneath her, and who put the notion in her head." He went, and while he went, I stood my post, and I watched the door of the suite, and I watched the princess sleep and wake and sleep, and I turned the serial number over in my glove until the ink of it had nearly worn away, and I thought about the pen itself, because a serial number is a made thing. It is stamped on at a factory, and a factory keeps records of where its made things are sold. If I could learn where that pen had been sold, I might learn whose hand had bought it. And a bought thing is a thread that no clever arrangement of flowers and cards can cut, because the buyer's name is written down in a place no palace schemer controls. But that thread ran outside the walls to a shop or a warehouse in the ordinary world, and I had no way to follow it. Not yet. I folded the thought away and kept it, the way you keep a key to a door you have not yet found. On the 4th day, Denby came back to me with a face full of news he did not know how to carry quietly, and I had to steady him with a look before he'd say a word. "She was told to," he said, "lo, the two of us pretending to inspect the corridor's far window. Ida Krell. She was told to carry that vase up herself and to set it on the windowsill, mind, not the table where flowers go. Told to place it just so, in the light, where it could be seen from the whole room. She grumbled about it below stairs, said it was beneath her and she'd have words about it." "Told by whom?" I said. "That's the thing." Denby's voice dropped further. "She wouldn't say. She went white when the girls asked her, and she wouldn't say a name. But there was a scullery maid who was in the passage when Krell got her orders, and the scullery maid says the voice was a woman's and grand, and that Krell curtsied when she took the orders, curtsied Ashby. A maid curtsies to her mistress. She curtsies to the family. She doesn't curtsy to the housekeeper or the steward. So, the maid of the queen consort's daughter had been ordered, by a woman grand enough to be curtsied to carry the pen-bearing vase up herself, and to set it in the light where it would be found. Every thread now ran toward the queen consort's household, toward Morwenna, or her daughter Verena, or someone close enough to them to command a maid's curtsy. It was, I will admit, the moment I most wanted to stop looking, because I had what a hasty man would call proof. I could have gone to whom? Marston was gone. The king had made his judgment and would not thank a corridor guard for reopening it on the word of a scullery maid. And the queen consort held the king's ear and had just demonstrated, brilliantly, that she could turn any inconvenient fact into a weapon against the man who raised it. If I walked into that study with what I had, I would not clear Marston. I would simply become the next man relieved of his post for insolence. And worse, I would warn the schemer that someone was looking, and the smiling hand would go still and careful, and I would lose the one advantage I had, which was that they did not yet know I was there. No, threads are not proof. A curtsy in a passage is not proof. I needed the one thing that could not be explained away, and I did not yet have it, and I understood, standing at my post on the fourth evening with the gray coming down again over the courtyard, that I was going to have to go deeper into this house than a corridor guard had any right to go, and that if I was caught doing it, no one would call it loyalty. They would call it exactly what the queen consort had called Marston's honesty. They would call it guilt. I looked at the door of the suite. Behind it the princess was awake. I could hear the small sounds of it, and I thought of something she had said to me on the first morning, half asleep, half in jest. Wake me when the world has finished ending. It had not finished. It had, I was beginning to see, only just begun. I made my first real move on the fifth day, and I made it because of the princess herself. She had been growing stronger. Whatever ailed her was of the kind that mends slowly and then all at once, and by the fifth day the color had come back into her face, and there was a sharpness in her eye that had not been there before. She was, I should say, no ordinary invalid. Princess Elara was the king's daughter by his first marriage, by the late Queen Isolde, and she had her mother's gift. I had heard the old servants say it 100 times for seeing straight through a smooth surface to the rot beneath. She had spent 9 days in that bed watching the ceiling, and a woman like that does not spend 9 days doing nothing with her mind. "You've been strange, Ashby," she said to me that afternoon when the physician had gone and we were alone, the door shut, the corridor quiet. "You've been strange since the morning you found the snake in the woodpile. Marston's been dismissed. Oh, don't look surprised, I have ears, and a hospital is the leakiest ship afloat. My father sacked the best security man this house has had in 20 years over a spy in my flowers, and you've been standing at that door for 5 days with a thundercloud behind your face. Now." She folded her hands. "You will tell me what you know, and you will tell me all of it, because it concerns me more than it concerns anyone, and because I am not so weak that I need protecting from the truth. I have thought a great deal about whether it was right to tell her. In the end I decided it was, and I have never regretted it, though it nearly cost us both dearly, because a corridor guard alone can only watch and wait and hope, but a princess, even a princess in a hospital bed, has powers a guard does not. She can send for people. She can ask questions no one dares refuse to answer. And she has, if she is Elara, a mind that can hold a whole scheme in its hands and turn it over and find the flaw. So I told her. I told her about the pen and the vase and the windowsill and the light. I told her about Marston carrying the proof to the king like an honest man and being broken for it. I told her about the woman who was ready and waiting in the study to turn it all against him. I told her about Ida Krell and the curtsy in the passage. And I told her the thought I had not dared say aloud to anyone, that the pen had been meant to be found, that its true purpose was not to spy but to destroy a man, and that the whole thing ran, by every thread I could pull, toward the household of the queen consort. She listened without a word. When I had finished, she was quiet a long time, looking at the gray window where the flowers had stood. "You're right about the pen," she said at last. "It was meant to be found. I can prove it not to a court but to myself, and it may guide you." She turned to me. "In the 5 days before it was found, Ashby, I said nothing in this room that a spy would want. Nothing. My father and I spoke of small things, the children, the garden, whether Torrin had done his letters. My physicians spoke of my recovery, which is dull and which the whole realm will know soon enough. There was no secret in this room worth the theft of it. If someone truly wished to spy on the crown, they would have put that pen in the king's study, or the council chamber, or the crown prince's rooms, somewhere words of weight are spoken. They put it here, in a sick room where nothing is said but comfort. Why? Because it was never about hearing," I said slowly, following her. "It was about being found." "It was about being found," she agreed. "And where it was found mattered. A spy in the king's council would frighten the king, but it would not tell him whom to blame. The council is 100 hands. But a spy in his sick daughter's private suite," her voice tightened just slightly, and I understood that beneath the cool reasoning there was a woman who had been used as a piece on a board. "A spy here points straight at the one office charged with keeping this one room sealed. It points at Marston. That is why they chose my sick room, Ashby, not for anything I might say, for the arrow it would draw. My illness was convenient. I was convenient." She said the last word with a quiet contempt that was not for me. "Someone used my father's fear for me to sharpen a blade against a good man. I should like to know who, and I should like it very much." "Then we want the same thing, ma'am." "We want the same thing." She was silent a moment. "Now, you said the pen has a serial, and you cannot trace it because the trace runs outside these walls to a shop. But I can, Ashby, or rather my aunt can." She meant the Princess Elara, the king's sister. And here I must tell you about Adela, because without her the thing could not have been done. Adela was the king's elder sister, and where the king was soft with grief, Adela was iron all the way through. She had never married. She had spent her life in the service of the house in the unshowy ways that hold a house together, the charities, the patronages, the long memory of who owed what to whom. She was feared, a little by those who had reason to fear her, and she was, above all, incorruptible. If there was one person in the whole family whom neither the queen consort's charm nor the queen consort's threats could touch, it was Princess Elara. And Elara loved her and trusted her, and this was the point. Adela had resources. She had people who could take a serial number to a maker and come back with a name. "I'll write to her," Elara said. "Not a summons, the queen consort watches my summons the way a cat watches a bird. A letter. A dull, loving letter from a niece in a hospital bed, and folded inside it, small, the serial number and one line. Find where this was sold and who bought it, and tell no one you are looking. Adela will understand. Adela always understands." She held out her hand. "Give me the number." I gave it to her, copied fresh onto a clean slip, keeping the original in my glove where it had lived for 5 days. She wrote her letter that evening, and I watched her fold the serial into it, and the next morning it went out in the ordinary post of the ward, one dull letter among 100, and no cat watching any bird would have marked it. And now we had 2 threads running at once, which is a dangerous and beautiful thing. The first ran through the house, Ida Krell, the curtsy, the household of the queen consort, and it was quick, but it was smoke. It could be waved away. The second ran outside the house, through the serial to the shop to the buyer, and it was slow, but it was iron. A name on a bill of sale cannot be waved away. If the 2 threads met, if the buyer of that pen turned out to be a hand inside the queen consort's household, then we would have the one thing that could not be explained. Then we could go to the king. But threads take time, and time is precisely what the schemer had used against Marston, and I should have known they would use it against us too. The blow came on the 7th day, and it came sideways, the way the clever always strike. A new head of security was appointed. This in itself was expected. The king could not leave the office empty. But the man appointed was not one of Marston's deputies, not a career security man risen through the ranks. He was a smooth, youngish man named Halbrook, and he came, everyone said, on the warm recommendation of the queen consort, who had spoken of his discretion and his loyalty and his modern methods. And his first act in office, his very first, was to review the security of the royal sick rooms and to announce that, for the princess's protection, the corridor guard was to be rotated. Rotated, that was the word. It sounded like nothing. It sounded like housekeeping. What it meant was that I was to be moved off the door of Elara's suite. I understood it at once, and the cold came back behind my ribs, colder than before. The schemer had learned how. I did not know, but they had learned that the corridor guard who found the pen had not simply saluted and forgotten. Perhaps Denby's questions below stairs had been marked after all. Perhaps a scullery maid had gossiped in the wrong ear. Perhaps my own thundercloud face had told a watching eye more than I knew. However they had learned it, they had learned that I was a loose thread, and they were doing to me exactly what they had done to Marston, only more quietly. Not a dismissal, which would raise questions, but a rotation which raised none. Move the guard. Break his watch. Put him where he can see nothing and ask nothing, and let the slow threads he has set running go cold for want of a hand to hold them. And there was worse in it than my own removal, because if I were moved off that door, then who would stand at it? Halbrook's men. Halbrook, who came recommended by the queen consort. The very hand I suspected would now control the door of the very room its pen had been found in, and would control, too, whatever came next, because I had never for a moment believed that the pen was the end of it. Whoever wanted Marston gone, and now wanted me gone, wanted the door of that suite in their own keeping. And a man does not fight so hard to hold a door, unless there is something he means to do on the other side of it. I went to Elara that evening, my last evening, by Halbrook's order on that post, and I told her, low and fast, everything I feared. She did not flinch. I will say that for her all my life. She lay in that bed, still not fully well, and she heard that the net was closing and that her one ally at her door was being pulled away, and she did not flinch. She thought. Then we have until tomorrow, she said. One night, Ashby, the threads. The serial letter to Adela is out. That runs on its own now, and no rotation can stop it, and we must simply pray it is quick. But the house thread, Ida Krell, the household, that dies the moment you leave this door, because Denby cannot ask questions forever without being caught, and there'll be no one to bring them to. Unless, she looked at me, unless we force it, tonight. We stop waiting for the slow iron thread and we make the smoke thread solid tonight while you are still here to act on it. How? By giving them something to reach for, she said, and there was, God help me, something of her father's late enemy's fear in the way she smiled. You said it yourself. Whoever holds this door means to do something on the other side of it, so we let them think the door is theirs, and we set a watch they don't know is watching. If they come for something tonight, we'll see who comes. And a hand caught reaching Ashby is a hand that cannot be explained away. It was reckless. It was the kind of plan a corridor guard has no business being part of. And I looked at the woman who had spent 9 days being used as a piece on a board, and who was now proposing from her sickbed to turn the board over, and I knew I would do it. Tell me what you need, I said, the very words Denby had said to me, and I felt the whole thing turning, the watchers about to become the watched. I need you, she said, to disobey your rotation for one single night, and to be very, very good at looking as though you have obeyed it. The plan we made was simple, because simple plans are the ones that survive contact with a clever enemy. At the change of watch that night, I would hand off my post to Halbrook's man with every appearance of a guard grumbling his way off a duty he'd held too long. I would sign the book. I would walk out of the wing in full view. And then I would come back not to the corridor where Halbrook's man would be, but to the old service stair that ran up the inside of the east wall, a stair that the hospital no longer used and that gave, through a disused linen room door, onto the far end of the very corridor I was leaving. From that room, with the door cracked a finger's width, a man could see the whole length of the corridor and the door of the suite, and not be seen. And Denby, young, angry, useful Denby, would do the other half. He would be off duty that night, and he would spend it below stairs as he had before, curious and loud about the wrong things, but with his eyes on one thing only: whether anyone from the Queen Consort's household went up toward the wing after dark. Between the two of us, the corridor and the stair, we would have eyes on both ends of the trap, and if a hand came reaching in the night, we would see whose hand it was. The one thing we could not do was tell the princess to sleep. She would not. She lay in that bed with the lamp low, awake, listening, a woman who had decided to be bait and meant to watch the hook. The watch change came at 10. I played my part. I grumbled to Halbrook's man, a hard-faced fellow named Rusk who watched me a shade too closely, that I was glad to be shot of the graveyard door, and I signed the book, and I walked out of the wing with my tread heavy and my face sour, and every step of it I felt Rusk's eyes on my back, and I gave him nothing but a tired man going home. Then I went down and around, out of the building's front and along the dark east side, and up the old service stair with my boots in my hand, so that they would not ring on the iron, and into the disused linen room, and I cracked the door a finger's width, and I settled in to wait. Waiting is the guard's whole art, and I had 11 years of it. The corridor lay long and dim before me, lit by the low night lamps, and at the far end was the door of the suite, and before it stood Rusk, a black shape against the pale wall, still as I would have been. The hospital breathed around us, the small sounds of a place where people sleep and heal and are afraid, and the hours went by, 11 and 12 and 1, and nothing moved but Rusk shifting his weight, and I began, in the treacherous small hours, to wonder if I had built a whole night's vigil on a shadow. That is the false dawn, and I know it now for what it was, but in the dark it felt like truth. I thought, perhaps I am wrong. Perhaps Marston's dismissal was only a grieved king's mistake, and the pen only a common spy's work, and Ida Krell only a maid who carried flowers because she was asked and thought no more of it, and Halbrook only a new broom sweeping clean, and I only a tired man who has built a conspiracy out of his own loyalty to a friend. Perhaps the whole thing is smoke, and I am about to be caught crouching in a linen room past a door I was ordered off, and there will be no name at the end of the slow thread but a stranger's, and I will have thrown away 11 years' good service for nothing. I very nearly rose and went home. I want to set that down honestly, because a man who tells you he never doubted is a man lying to make himself look better than he was. I nearly rose and went home. And then, at 20 minutes past 2, the far door at the corridor's end opened, and a figure came through, and everything I had begun to doubt stood up in me and hardened into certainty. The figure was a woman, and she was not a nurse, and she was not staff. She wore a dark traveling coat over a nightgown hurriedly, and she moved down the corridor toward the suite with the quick, low tread of someone who does not wish to be seen but is used to going where she pleases. And Rusk, this was the thing, this was the whole thing, Rusk did not challenge her. He did not raise a hand. He stepped aside. He, the guard sworn to let no one past unless the roster cleared them, stepped aside for a woman coming to a princess's sick room at 2 in the morning, which meant that Rusk had been told to expect her, which meant that Rusk was not merely Halbrook's man but the schemer's, and that the door of Elara's suite had indeed passed into the enemy's keeping exactly as I had feared. The woman reached the door. She put her hand to it, and in the low light of the corridor I saw her face, and it was not the face I had spent 7 days learning to suspect. It was not the Queen Consort. It was not the Lady Verena. It was the Lady Surrey's, the Princess Elara's own sister. I had built my whole understanding on the household of the Queen Consort, and here at 2 in the morning was Elara's own blood, come secret and coated against the cold to the door of her sister's sick room, waved past by the schemer's guard. I confess the ground shifted under me. For a moment the whole shape I had made came apart, and I did not know what I was looking at. But I did not move, because a guard who moves on the first thing he sees moves too soon. I watched. Surrey's opened the door and slipped inside, and I could not see what passed within, but the door did not shut fully. It stood ajar the width of a hand, the way Rusk had let it, and after a moment I heard voices, low, and one of them rose, and it was Elara's, and it was not the voice of a woman greeting a beloved sister in the night. "You," Elara said, and I have never heard so much cold understanding in 2 letters. It was you. I could not stay in the linen room. Whatever was happening in that suite, my princess was in it, and she was still weak, and there was a guard at her door who took his orders from the enemy. I came out of the linen room and down the corridor fast and silent in my stockinged feet, and Rusk heard me at the last and turned, and his hand went to his side, and I put him against the wall with my forearm across his chest before he could make a sound, not a blow. I want to be clear, nothing gratuitous. I simply pinned him, a big man surprised by a bigger, and I put my mouth to his ear and told him that if he made one sound I would break his oath as publicly as it had already been broken privately. And he went still, because a man who has taken a secret bribe fears nothing so much as noise. And through the ajar door I heard the rest of it, and it was not what I had thought, and it was worse. "I don't know what you mean," Surrey's was saying, but her voice shook. "You know exactly what I mean." Elara, propped up now, I could tell by the sound, awake and terrible. "You've come for it. You've come tonight because tomorrow the new guard is settled and the door is truly yours and you thought it safe. But you couldn't wait, could you? You had to be sure it was gone before anyone looked twice. So which is it, Surrey's? Have you come to plant a second one or to take away the first thing you left that you're afraid I've found?" "There's nothing to find," Surrey said, and now she was frightened, truly frightened. "The pen is gone. Marston took it. It's over." "The pen," Elara said softly, "was never the thing you were afraid of." "Was it?" And there was a silence in which I understood, standing in the dark corridor with a bribed guard pinned to the wall and my heart going like a drum, that I had been right about the shape of the trap and wrong about the hand, that the household of the queen consort was in it up to the neck, but that the hand at the very center of it, the hand that had reached into her own sister's sick room, belonged to Elara's own blood, and that I did not yet know why, and that I was about to. "Torrens' letters," Elara said. "That's it, isn't it? My son's letters, the ones our mother left him, the ones that say where." "Stop," Surrey said, and it was a plea now, all the frightened weight of it. "Elara, stop. You don't understand what she's promised me, what she'll do to me if—" "She," Elara's voice cut. "So it is her. It was always her. You're only the hand she put in the fire so hers stayed clean. Oh, Surrey's. And now, extraordinarily, there was grief in it, real grief, sister for sister. What did she promise you? What is worth this?" I had heard enough, more than enough, and yet I could not go in, because the moment I did, the moment a guard broke through that door, Surrey's would fall silent, and the queen consort's hand would go still and careful, and I would have a frightened woman and a bribed guard, and no proof at all. Only a corridor's worth of overheard words that any clever mouth in the king's study could unmake. I needed it whole. I needed the name spoken and the reason spoken, and, above all, I needed it heard by someone the king could not dismiss. And it was in that moment, pinning Rusk to the wall with the whole thing balanced on a knife, that the slow iron thread finally arrived, because down the corridor from the far door came a second figure, and this one I did know, and the sight of her stopped my heart with relief. It was Princess Adela, the king's iron sister. Come, I would learn not by chance and not by summons, but because the letter with the serial folded inside it had reached her, and she had done what Adela always did. She had not merely traced the pen. She had come herself in the dead of night to stand at the end of the thread and see what was tied to it. She saw me. She saw the guard pinned to the wall. She saw the ajar door and heard the voices beyond it. And Princess Adela, who understood everything, understood this in an instant, and she raised one hand to me, "Wait," and she came down that corridor without a sound, and she stood beside me at the ajar door, and she listened, and the whole future of the house hung on what her ears would hear in the next minute. She promised me the regency, Ceres said, and there it was, the thing spoken plain, the thing I had needed. When Elara, when you were ill, and it looked as though she said if you didn't recover, and Rowan was young and the king so grieved, that there'd be a regency and that she'd see me raised to it at her side if I helped her clear the way. Marston knew things. Marston was loyal to you, to your mother's memory. He'd never have let her near the Regency Council. So she needed him gone. And she needed a door of her own into your rooms for whatever came after. And God forgive me, I carried her pen up in the flowers because she said it would only frighten father into sacking Marston, that no one would be hurt, that you'd never even know. And if I hadn't recovered, Elara said very quietly, if I had died, Ceres, in this bed, with a spy in my flowers and my own sister carrying it, what then? Ceres did not answer, and the not answering was the most terrible sound in the whole affair. Beside me in the dark, Princess Adela let out a breath that was almost too soft to hear, and I felt rather than saw her decision settle, iron into iron. Now, Ashby, she murmured, now we may go in, and you will let no one leave. I brought Rusk in with me. I would not leave a bribed guard loose in the corridor at my back, and I put him inside the door and stood before it, and Princess Adela walked into the middle of that lamplit room like judgment given flesh. Ceres turned and saw her aunt and made a sound I will not try to write down. Elara, propped against her pillows, pale but blazing, looked from her sister to Adela to me, and I saw her understand that the whole net had closed, and that it had closed not on her but around her, to keep her safe. Sit down, Ceres, Adela said, and Ceres sat, because there was no arguing with that voice. You will not run and you will not lie, because I have stood in that corridor for the last 5 minutes and heard every word, and so has this guard, and so has your sister. The time for saving yourself by silence is past. There is only one thing left that can lighten what is coming for you, and it is the truth, told once, told whole, told now, the whole of it and her part in it named plain. She let the word her hang in the air. You have already said it once, say it where it counts. And Ceres broken said it. She told us all of it, and I will set it down as she told it, because the king would need it, and because Marston deserved it. The scheme was the queen consorts from root to branch. Morwenna had seen in Elara's illness an opening, a king unmanned by grief, a crown prince Rowan still young and untried, and beyond them a shadow of a possibility, that if the illness took a darker turn, there would be a regency, and whoever governed that regency would govern the realm in all but name for years. She meant it to be her. But she was not a fool. She knew she was watched, that Adela watched her, that the old loyal officers of the house watched her, and that chief among the watchers was Marston, who had served Queen Isolde before her, and who would sooner die than see Isolde's daughter's house fall under Morwenna's hand. So Marston had to go, not killed. Nothing so crude but discredited, broken, made to look a fool or a traitor, so that his warnings would carry no weight when the regency was in play. And the way to break ahead of security is to prove that his security has failed. Hence the pen. A spy in the most sacred, most sealed room in the house, the sick princess's suite, and found there, would prove Marston's office porous beyond forgiveness. Morwenna had bought the pen through a cutout months before against just such a day. She had waited for her opening, and when Elara fell ill she had moved. But she would not carry the pen herself, and she would not risk her own maid or her daughters, whose hands could be traced to her. She needed a hand that no one would ever suspect, a hand that had every innocent reason to be near the sick princess. She needed Elara's own family, and Ceres, younger, overlooked, a sister who had spent her life in Elara's shining shadow and had learned to resent the shade. Ceres was hungry, and frightened of being no one, and Morwenna had spent a year learning exactly where that hunger lived and how to feed it. Help me clear the way, and when the regency comes, you will not be the forgotten sister any longer. You will sit at my side. You will matter. So Ceres had carried the pen up in the queen consort's flowers, told only that it would frighten the king into sacking a disloyal old guard, that no one would be hurt, that Elara would never know. And Morwenna had traced the flowers carefully to her own office, not to hide her hand, but to display it just enough that suspicion, if it came, would fall on her in a way she could triumphantly refute, drawing every eye to the wrong quarrel while the true hand, Surrey's, stayed invisible. It was a scheme with a scheme inside it, a false trail laid over a true one, and it had cost a good man his life's work in a single morning. And tonight, Adela said, why come tonight? Because Marston took the pen and was sacked and it should have been finished, Surrey's whispered. But then she heard. She heard from her man Rusk that the corridor guard who found it had been asking questions, that he hadn't let it lie. She was afraid he'd found something. She sent me to be sure there was nothing else here, nothing of hers, nothing that could, and to see whether Elara suspected. She said if Elara suspected, we'd need to think again about the illness, about whether it should worsen. The room went very cold and very still. Say that last part plainly, Adela said, and her voice could have cut stone. Surrey's put her face in her hands. She has a physician in her keeping, in the wing. She said if Elara recovered and started asking questions, the physician could see to it that the recovery reversed, that a relapse would end the questions and open the regency both at once. She sent me tonight to tell her whether it had come to that. And I came and I looked at my sister's face and she broke. I couldn't. I came to warn her. That's the truth as well, Aunt, before God. I carried the pen and I have earned whatever comes, but I came tonight to warn her not to harm her. I couldn't do it. She's my sister. Now I understood the whole black width of it, and so did every soul in that room. It was no longer a scheme against a guard. It was a plot against the princess's life, held in reserve, ready to be used if the truth came too close. And it had come too close. I had brought it too close. My own questions, my own refusal to let Marston's ruin lie, had very nearly signed Elara's death warrant, for it was my questions, carried to Morwenna by the bribed Rusk, that had made her reach for the physician and the poison she held in reserve. I have carried that since. But I have also carried this, that if I had not asked, the physician would still have been there, the poison still in reserve and no one watching. My questions did not make the danger. They dragged it into the light where it could be stopped. That is the only comfort a guard gets in such a thing, and I have learned to take it. Adela did not waste a second. She turned to me. The physician, name Surrey's now. Vell, Surrey said. Dr. Vell. He has the night rounds of this wing. He could be anywhere in the wing. Ashby, Adela's eyes were on me. Can you take him without noise, before Rusk here is missed and word runs to that woman that the game is up? Yes, ma'am. And then because it mattered, but not alone and not by breaking heads in a hospital full of the sick. I'll need Denby, my man's below, watching the stair, and I'll need the one thing that ends this cleanly. I'll need you, ma'am, to go to the king. Now, tonight. Because a corridor guard and a princess in a sickbed cannot arrest a queen consort's physician, but the king's own sister can, and the king's own word can. And if we move on Vell without the king behind us, Morwenna will have him spirited away, and every thread we've pulled will go slack in the morning. Adela looked at me for a moment, a corridor guard, giving a princess her marching orders, and something almost like a smile touched her hard mouth. Marston chose his men well, she said. Very well. You hold this room and that door and that traitor guard. Elara, you will not be left alone one moment. I am sending my own woman up this instant, and she does not leave your side. Surrey's. She looked at her broken niece, and the iron did not soften, but something in it grieved. You will come with me to your uncle the king, and you will kneel, and you will tell him what you told us, every word, and you will pray that your coming here tonight to warn your sister weighs something on the scale, because God knows the rest weighs like lead. And so in the black hours before dawn on the 8th day, the house began at last to move, not the schemer's slow, smiling machine, but the true house, the king's house, waking to what had been done in its dark. I will not pretend the next hour was orderly. It was the most dangerous hour of the whole affair, because a scheme that senses itself discovered thrashes like a hooked thing, and we had to move faster than the thrash. Adela took Surrey's down to the king. I sent word by a trusted night porter to Denby to come up the stair at once. And I stood at the door of Elara's suite, my post again, though no roster had returned it to me, with a bribed guard sitting sullen and silent against the wall, and the Princess Elara propped in her bed watching the door with her mother's eyes. "You did this," she said to me quietly while we waited. "You alone, Ashby. You saw a pen in a vase and you would not let it lie, and every clever soul in this house looked at the wrong hand, and you looked at the right one." "I looked at the wrong hand too, ma'am, for 7 days," I said. "I was sure it was the Queen Consort's household." "It was the Queen Consort's household," she said. "It was only wearing my sister's face." She was quiet a moment. "Will they catch Vel?" "If the king moves fast, yes. And I think the king, once he understands, will move very fast indeed." He did, but not before the scheme threw its last, worst dice. Denby reached me at 3:30, breathless from the stair, and I had him inside and posted before I told him the shape of the night in 6 sentences, and his face went from confusion to fury to a hard readiness that made me proud of the boy. And then, no more than a minute after Denby's arrival, before Adela could possibly have reached the king, before any lawful hand could close on Dr. Vel, the door at the far end of the corridor opened, and Dr. Vel himself came through it, with a case in his hand and a nurse's chart under his arm, on his night rounds, coming to the princess's suite exactly as he had every right to do. He had not yet heard, word had not reached him. He was simply coming, in the ordinary course of his poisoned duty, to look in on the recovering princess in the dead of night, and I understood with a lurch that this was the very visit Surrey's warning had been meant to trigger or prevent, that Vel had perhaps already been told, days or hours ago, that if the princess's recovery held and her questions sharpened, he was to see the recovery reversed. And here he came with his case, to a room he believed held only a weak woman and 1 guard. He did not know that the guard was me, and that I had heard everything, and that I would sooner have died on that threshold than let him pass. "Doctor," I said, and I stepped to fill the door, "the princess is resting. She'll not be disturbed tonight." He smiled the smooth smile of a man used to walking through guards. "Her rounds are on the hour, guardsman. Step aside." "Her rounds are cancelled," I said, "by order." "By whose order?" "By mine," I said, and I did not move, and something in my stillness, the stillness that is a guard's whole art, the stillness that had let me find a pen in a vase and hold a secret for 7 days, told him at last that this was not an ordinary night, and I was not an ordinary obstacle. His eyes flicked past me to the room, to Rusk sitting bound still against the wall, to Denby with his hand ready, to the princess sitting up and wide awake and watching him with her mother's terrible clear eyes. And Dr. Vel understood that the game was up, and he did the thing that guilty men do when the door will not open. He reached, quickly, into his case. I did not let him bring his hand out full. I closed the distance and took his wrist. One motion, controlled, proportionate, nothing gratuitous, the exact economy of force a guardsman is trained to and no more. And I turned it so that the case fell, and the small sealed vial that had been half out of his hand fell with it and rolled across the floor and stopped against the leg of the princess's bed, where it lay winking in the lamplight. A little glass thing no bigger than the pen had been, and just as patient, and just as deadly. Denby was on his other side before Vel could draw breath, and between us we held him, and he did not struggle long, because a man caught reaching does not have the heart of a man who believes himself safe. "Pick that up, Denby," I said, "in a cloth, and do not open it and do not let it out of your sight. That is the second pen. That is the thing that cannot be explained away." And it was. When Princess Adela returned, and she returned within the half hour, and she did not return alone, she returned with the king. I had never before seen King Alaric move fast. Grief had made him slow, and I had thought slowness was the whole of him now. I was wrong. He came down that corridor in his nightrobe with his face like the edge of an axe, and Adela beside him, and Ceres behind, white and weeping, and two of the oldest and most trusted officers of the house at his back. And behind them, God be thanked, walking with the stiff pride of a man who has been sent for in the night to be told his honor is restored, came Marston. The king came into the room and stopped, and his eyes went first to his daughter, alive and sitting up and watching him, and I saw the axe edge of his face break, just for a moment, into something no crown should have to wear. Then his eyes went to the vial in Denby's cloth, and to Vel held between us, and to Rusk against the wall, and last of all to me. "Tell me," the king said, "all of it. From the pen." So I told him. I told him standing at attention in the middle of the night in a hospital suite, a corridor guard addressing his sovereign, and I told it plain and whole and in order, the pen in the vase, Marston carrying it honestly to the study and being broken for his honesty, the trap that had two jaws, the cereal and the flowers and the curtsy in the passage, the letter Elara sent to Adela, my rotation off the door, the watch we set, and the woman who came in the night and what she confessed, and the physician who came with a vial to end the questions, and the princess both. And as I spoke, I watched the king's face, and I watched him understand at last the seam in his wife's brilliant reasoning that he had been too grieved to see, that the true facts had been arranged to point at Marston by the very hand that had committed the crime, and that he had struck the head off the one man in the house who had never once failed him. When I had done, the king was silent a long time. Then he turned to Marston, and he did a thing I have never seen a king do before or since. He inclined his head not deeply, but truly, to a dismissed servant. "I broke your name in a morning," the king said, "on a lie so well made that I could not see the hand inside it. I cannot give you back that morning. But I can give you back everything else, and I can say, before these witnesses, that the fault was mine and the honor was yours, and that this house owes its daughter's life to a guard you trained and would not have if you had trained him differently. Marston, will you take back your post?" "I will, sire," Marston said, and his voice was steady, but I saw what it cost him to keep it so. "Then take it," the king said, "and take Vel and take that vial and take the man against the wall, and I will deal with the rest of it myself." His jaw set. The rest of it. We all knew whom he meant, and no one said her name, and the king's face said that he already knew what he would find when he went to her rooms, and that he would go alone, and that whatever the queen consort Morwenna had been to him, she had ended it tonight in the belly of a silver pen and a little glass vial, and that there would be no arranging of facts, this time, that could save her. What became of Morwenna I will tell you shortly, for it is part of the resolution and you have earned it. But first let me finish the night, because the night finished with the princess, as it should. When the king had gone to deal with his wife, and Vel and Rusk had been taken away under Marston's own hand, and Ceres had been led off, not to a cell, though she wept as though to one, but to Adela's keeping, to answer for her part in the cold light of the coming days, the room emptied at last, and it was only Elara and me, as it had been on the first gray morning 9 days before. She was worn to the bone, but she would not sleep yet. "Come here, Ashby," she said, and I came and stood by the bed. "You found a pen in a vase," she said, "and you would not let it lie, and a wiser man would have let it lie and kept his post and his peace. Why didn't you?" I thought about it honestly before I answered, because she deserved an honest answer. "'Cause a man who guards a door," I said, "guards what's behind it, not the wood, not the lock, the person. And the moment I saw that pen, ma'am, I knew that keeping the door shut wasn't enough anymore, that the wrong had already got inside and the flowers past all our locks, and that shutting the door harder wouldn't undo it. There was only one way to guard you after that, and it was to find the hand." I paused. "Marston taught me that. Guard the person, not the post. I only did what he taught me." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she smiled, and it was her mother's smile, the old servants would have said. "Then when I am well," she said, And I mean to be very well, Ashby, out of pure spite if nothing else. You will not go back to standing in a corridor being mistaken for furniture. You'll stand where you can be seen. I'll have it of my father as the price of my recovery." She closed her eyes. "Now go and tell Denby he did well, and then, for the love of heaven, sleep. The world," she murmured, drifting off at last safe, "has finished ending." It had. And I went and told Denby he had done well, and I did not sleep, because there was too much light in me to sleep, and I stood at the window where the pen had been and watched the true dawn come up gray and then gold over the courtyard, and I thought about how close a thing it had been, and how a whole house had nearly turned on the truth of it because the truth wore a familiar face and the lie was better dressed. Here then is how it ended, all of it, so that no thread is left hanging. The Queen Consort Morwenna was not tried in any open court, for the king would not drag his daughter's poisoning and his own blindness through a public dock, but she was stripped of her household, her offices, and her place at his side, and removed to a distant estate under a quiet and permanent watch, never to return to the capital or to any room where a member of the family slept. It was said the king never spoke her name again. Dr. Vell was tried, and the vial spoke against him, and he was undone entirely. Rusk, the bribed guard, was dismissed in disgrace, which he had earned twice over. The Lady Surrey's was the hardest reckoning, for she had carried the pen and yet had turned in the end and come to warn her sister, and the house was divided over her the way families always are over the ones who fall and half rise again. In the end it was Elara herself who decided it. She did not forgive her sister lightly or quickly. That took years, and I will not pretend otherwise. But she asked the king for Surrey's life and liberty, on the condition that Surrey's go into the quiet service of the house's charities under Princess Adela's iron eye, and never again come within reach of power. And Surrey's took it, weeping, and kept to it, and became in time a smaller and a better woman than she had been. Marston stood as head of security for 6 more years and trained a dozen more men, and when he retired at last it was with the king's own hand on his shoulder. He never let me thank him for the slip of paper he pressed into my glove, the serial number that started the whole slow iron thread. "You'd have found another way," he always said. "Perhaps. I am glad I did not have to." And Princess Elara recovered wholly, as she had sworn she would, out of pure spite and better reasons, and she kept her word to me. I did not go back to the corridor. I stood from then on, where I could be seen, at her right hand, on the days that mattered, a guard who had once been mistaken for furniture, and had learned that furniture has ears, and that a door is only wood, and that the whole of a guardsman's honor lives not in the lock he holds but in the life behind it. People ask me sometimes how the whole affair began, and I tell them the truth. It began with a silver pen, no thicker than my smallest finger, clipped to the inner lip of a flower vase where it had no business being, and with a man who saw it and did not touch it, and would not let it lie. That was the beginning. The end was a princess, alive, asleep and safe, and a good man's honor given back to him, and a true dawn coming up gold over the courtyard of a house that had very nearly lost its way in the dark, and had found it again because one guard remembered what he was truly there to guard. I have stood a great many posts since. I have never again found a snake in the woodpile, but I have never once stopped looking, and I never will, so long as there is a door in this house with someone I love behind it.